One multi-billion-dollar family spends more money on a campaign than either of the two major political parties. I define that process not as democracy, but as oligarchy.
Welcome back. With the mega-rich writing bigger checks than ever for U.S. presidential candidates, we're asking a pressing question. Can a billionaire buy the White House? Let's get back to our panel in studio. With us, John Fortier, director of the Democracy Project at the Bipartisan Policy Center; Simon Marks, president and chief correspondent at Feature Story News; and political commentator and journalist Bob Franken. Bob, can one guy or family buy the election?
Pretty much so. Certainly he can make a candidate viable, his candidate of choice. And so the question always is, well, what do they get for their money? And what they get, if they're successful in putting in a candidate, is they get somebody who's going to pretty much take their agenda and is going to make it the government policy of the United States. Jimmy Carter, the former president, who of course is now suffering from cancer, but a few weeks before that announcement, he was on a radio program and he said, this is, remember, a former president, that the United States has become an oligarchy and it is fueled, the political system is fueled by bribes in the name of campaign contributions. I don't think that that's something you can even argue about now.
Simon, in Britain, could you have a situation where a few people can buy an election?
Well, you can have a situation where people seek influence, and there has been considerable discussion in Britain about the role that foreign money plays in the political process, and more generally now in places like the City of London, the financial district of London, where you see enormous amounts of fresh money arriving from places like Eastern Europe that can then be used to wine and dine members of Parliament. There's been a huge scandal in Britain over the last few years about the personal expenses of lawmakers. But the campaign fundraising rules are significantly tighter than those here in the United States. And corporations, I think in terms of their relationship with the political process, have much lower expectations than corporations have here about the role that they're going to play in an election campaign, particularly as we head towards things like the conventions and the final weeks of a campaign.
Well, I see some problems with the system that everyone's been indicating, but I think maybe we're going a little too far, and that corporations are more engaged in elections than they were, partly because of some Supreme Court decisions, but they don't tend to be the largest donors. Many of them are cautious about getting in, wanting to offend one candidate or the other. In fact, many Republicans worry that corporations really aren't supporting them. They kind of divide their money. It's more on the Democratic side. A single billionaire probably isn't going to determine the election. A single billionaire can prop up a candidate, can bring back a candidate who doesn't have much money to keep them in the race. But at the end of the day, the candidates who win are going to attract a lot of support. That's a lot of electoral support as well as a lot of monetary support from a lot of sources. So I do think we have some questions about the disclosure of where some of this money is coming from. We should worry about groups of people or industries having some more influence. But I don't think we should worry that a single billionaire is going to get that person that they want in office, or that corporations are going to dominate. There's still it's a big system out there. It's a big world. There are a lot of billionaires. Yeah. In a way, there are a lot of interests out there. And so it's worrisome, but not as much as I think we've been indicating.
Well, I would disagree that the corporations don't act as sort of a monolith. To some degree, I think they do. I think that they have certain interests in common. And as a matter of fact, I think it's important to point out here that they're able to exert their influence both over Republicans and Democrats, who many people would argue are just members of the same capitalist party, that we have one-party system in the United States with two factions. But the corporations have certain interests in the tax breaks and the laws that govern them, et cetera, in their relationship overseas, et cetera. And if they can, in fact, become so important because of their contributions, they can have an inordinate influence on what's going on in the government of the United States. As I think you pointed out earlier, somebody who gives $2,700 or $5,400 is not going to have access to the Oval Office. Somebody who gives the millions upon millions of dollars that the corporations give will have access to the Oval Office.
There is, from a global perspective, a perception problem at the very least here. This is a country that promotes democracy internationally and has a long tradition and a widely respected tradition of promoting democracy internationally. And yet, this is a country that over the next year plus change is going to spend upwards of $5 billion not actually discussing in any mature, sensible terms the massive fundamental issues and problems that it confronts. There's been no maturity on the campaign trail thus far about the major issues. And are you ever going to get to that? If you don't, people looking in internationally are going to say, well, this democracy that they've got, it's a funny old thing, isn't it, with all this money sloshing around in a system that then doesn't lead to a sensible discussion about the problems that the country's facing.
John, we have something else from Donald Trump. Let's take a listen to what he said about money in politics.
I give to many people. Before 2 months ago, I was a businessman. I give to everybody. When they call, I give. And you know what? When I need something from them, 2 years later, 3 years later, I call them. They are there for me. So and that's a broken system.
You know, if we look at public sentiment in the United States, looking at one poll here, 84% of Americans say money has too much influence in politics in the United States. So in a sense, he's playing to the gallery here, isn't he?
He is, and it's obviously from a funny source. And we've had that before, someone like Ross Perot running as a billionaire and being able to say, you know, I may be the rich guy in the field, but I'm not beholden to anybody. And he's playing to that. Interestingly, he's playing up the idea that he has been part of this system too, but won't be as president. So, you know, I think Donald Trump, at the end of the day, there are some worries about money. Money, though, I don't think, the most money doesn't win the race. And for Donald Trump, he has the money to stay in the race. He also has the fame and charisma to stay in the race. Whether he'll win or not, it's another question. But often what it is that money is necessary to be a player. And so some of these lesser candidates who can't raise the money, who don't have a backer, Donald Trump is there. He's got his own resources. He claims a certain independence. He will not lose because of lack of funds.
Yeah, he has that luxury. Bob, very quick, we heard Hillary Clinton say at the beginning of the program, system is dysfunctional when it comes to money. It needs to be fixed, even if it needs a constitutional amendment. Do you see a fix coming anytime soon?
Certainly not through a constitutional amendment. First of all, the oligarchs, who I keep referring to, would not permit it. That is to say that they would wage a campaign against it. And secondly, even if they didn't, amending the Constitution is a very, very difficult thing to do, an extremely difficult thing to do. And thirdly, it would be a mixed bag. I mean, there are protections about speech in the Constitution, freedom of speech, and those could very easily be challenged if there was an amendment to the Constitution. I think that she was going for her own soundbite.
Simon, can one realistically, I mean, if we look at the rest of the world, separate money from politics, no matter what the system is?
You mean anywhere in the world?
Yeah.
I think in any analysis of any electoral system, you've obviously got to be looking at where the money is and what restrictions have been placed on preventing that money from polluting the system. I mean, the real issue is the real issue is the pollution of the system by the money, and not just the advertising that candidates themselves are able to put on the air here now, but the issue ads that interest groups are able to put on the air in favor of particular candidates' positions here. And that's strikingly different in this country than it is from many others internationally.
And, you know, we've been talking a lot about Britain. What about Europe? Do we see a lot of money in politics in the European democracies?
It obviously depends on the country that you're looking at, of course. I mean, there are some countries where the strictures on money in politics are looser, and some countries like Britain where they are tighter than you'd find here in the United States. Generally speaking, you don't see the American system and the relative freedoms of people to engage financially in campaigns. Generally speaking, you don't see those emulated in Europe.
Okay, gentlemen, that's where we're going to have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for joining us.